Court does call the case of the people of the state of Michigan versus Darrel Hicks.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. Marie Tanha, Assistant Prosecuting Attorney on behalf of the people.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. Sam Bernstein with on behalf of Mr. Hicks, who is approaching and is seated now.
Thank you, sir. All right, date and time, relatively speaking, for the preliminary examination. Are the parties ready?
Ready to proceed, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you.
All right. Call your first witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. People called Deja Yardy McCoy.
Come forward and be sworn.
Before you take a seat, raise your right hand. Solemnly swear in front of the testimony about the we're gonna see. State, spell your first and last name for the record, please.
D.A. McCoy Yardy.
Can you spell that for the record, please? Yes, please.
D.E.A.C.I.J.A.H. McCoy McCoy
Okay, thank you. You may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. And am I pronouncing Deja? Is that right? Okay, thank you. May I call you Deja?
Yes.
Thank you. Deja, I'm going to be asking you some questions, and after I'm done asking you questions, defense counsel might ask you some questions, okay? If anything is unclear to you, if you're not hearing what we're saying, if you're not understanding what we're saying, please let us know, okay? When you're answering questions, sometimes we get used to saying instead of yes or no. Please try to say yes or no as much as you can, okay? Thank you. Deja, do you know someone by the name of Darrel Hicks Sr?
Yes.
Who is he to you?
My son's brother.
And do you see him in court today?
Yes.
Could you let the court know where he's seated and describe an item of clothing he's wearing?
To the left of me.
Okay. Can you describe what he's wearing, please? Thank you. Your Honor, may the record reflect the witnesses identified the defendant?
Record shall so reflect as that appears.
Thank you. And you said he's your son's father. Are you currently in a relationship?
No.
Okay. And your child, your son that you have in common, what's his name? And what was his date of birth?
July 13, 2024.
And is he currently alive? Did Darrel Jr. have a normal birth?
Yes.
Any concerns with him or you during the birth with Junior? Did Darrel Jr. have any well visits with a pediatrician?
Yes.
Okay. Were there any concerns with during those well visits? Okay. I'm going to ask you some questions about what happened late August, early September of 2024.
Okay.
It's been a while since then. So if I'm asking you a question or if the defense attorney is asking you a question and you don't remember the answer, please let us know that you don't remember, okay? Thank you. Where did you live in August of 2024? And is that Ypsilanti Township, State of Michigan, Washington County? Thank you. Who lived there with you?
My two sons.
And was one of those Darrel Hicks Jr.? How old was he in August of 2024?
A month.
And is Darrel Hicks Sr. the father of Darrel Hicks Jr.?
Yes.
How often would Darrel Hicks Sr. see Darrel Jr.?
Often.
Okay. How often would you say? Around that time in fall of 2024?
Close to every day.
Okay.
You said close to every day.
Yes.
And on August 29th of 2024, did you coordinate with the defendant to have him watch Darrel Jr.?
Yes.
And did he come over to do that?
Yes.
And he came over to the house you described you living at in August. And what was the purpose of him coming to watch Darrel Jr.?
For me to go out.
And so on August 29th, what time did you leave the house?
30 p.m.
And was the plan to have Darrel Hicks Sr. watch Darrel Jr. overnight?
Yes,
Okay, into August 30th of 2024?
yes.
When you left the house on August 29th, how was Darrel Jr. acting at the time?
If I'm not mistaken, 29th of month.
Okay, so I know there's some confusion about the dates. So what we're talking about is the day before ambulance had to be called and he was taken away. So the day before would have been on the August 29th, when you left the house and defendant was supposed to watch him overnight. How was he acting on the day before when you left the house? Okay. Was he eating okay throughout that day? Anything that stood out to you that was concerning regarding his body movements or how he was acting? So you said you left the house August 29th, and it was sometime in the evening. When's the next time you physically came back to the house?
The next day,
Okay. And around what time approximately did you come back to the house?
I would say 4:30, 4:45
Yeah.
p.m. Yes.
Before you came back to the house, so between when you left on August 29th and when you came back on August 30th, did you have any communication with the defendant?
Yes.
Was that text message, phone calls?
FaceTime.
Was anything brought up to you as a concern of how Darrel Jr. was doing?
No.
From when you left on August 29th to when you came back on August 30th, as far as you know, was there anyone else that came to the house?
No.
So defendant was watching Darrel Jr. Was your other son present at times
Yes.
during that time frame? Okay. On August 30th, before you came home, was there someone else there for a brief period of time? Do you remember having a visit by someone who came to check?
The day before,
Not the day before, I'm sorry, I'm confusing you. So you left on August 29th, you came back on August 30th. Before you came back on August
oh,
30th,
yes, the pediatrician,
okay. Was it a pediatrician or was it a different?
social work. I know it's the University of Michigan, they do home visits,
Okay. And do you think it was a pediatrician or a social worker?
social work.
And do you know approximately when she was there?
12 p.m.
On August 30th, the day that you came back?
But she came at 11.
11, around 11. Did you ever receive any information about anyone else being at the house? Okay. So you returned on in the afternoon of August 30th. What did you observe when you came home?
When you say 11,
Sure, yeah. So when you came home on August 30th, when you came into the home, did you see anything? Did anything stand out to you?
my son was in
And when you say your son, are you talking about Darrel Jr.? Okay. He was in your room? Okay.
Yes.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
it happens. So you come home and how do you know that Darrel Jr. was in your room?
Because he wasn't with his dad.
Okay, and where was his dad? And just to be extra annoying, when we're saying his dad, you're referring to the defendant? Okay, so defendant was in the living room. Darrel Jr. was in your room?
Yes.
Okay, so what did you do, if anything, when you got home?
Came upstairs and like scanned. Of course, that's how I noticed my son was And I went in my room to my child.
Okay. And what did you notice about your child?
He was sleeping and looked to me.
Okay. Was there anything when you saw Darrell Jr., was there anything that caused concern?
No. No.
So on August 30th, when you came home, defendant was in the living room. Darrell Jr. was in your room.
Yes.
What brought you home at that time? What made you come home at that time?
Yes. I miss my kids coming out all night. It was kind of like I miss my kids.
Okay. So when you come home, Darrell Jr. is in your room. Was there something that that you noticed about Darrell Jr. that caused you concern?
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell the court about that, please?
I picked him up. And right from his bottom, and he started to smile in my voice. And when I reached under his head, his eyes like frozen like his head. And it was like he was changing color. Like he was shaking his arms like a tank. Like when I tried to touch his arms with it. My brother had a silent seizure in my siblings, so I know what a seizure looked like when it's happening. So I could tell he was seizing.
So he was having a seizure. Okay. And you described, you kind of showed your arm like moving back and forth pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Is that what Darrell Jr.'s arm was doing?
Yes.
Okay. And then you said it kind of tensed up.
Like, yes, it felt like tense.
Okay. So at that point, you knew he was having a seizure.
Yeah.
Okay. What's the next thing that you did, if anything?
Call 911. And of course, as Darrel Sr. what happened.
Okay. And did he say anything about what had happened?
No.
Did you have any, how were you feeling as this was happening? Okay. What were you confused about?
Because I didn't leave him.
So when you left him on August 29th, his arm wasn't twitching, it wasn't tense.
He was
Okay. Do you remember if defendant Darrel Hicks Sr. Had communicated with you throughout the day on August 30th that Darrell Jr. wasn't eating properly or keeping food down?
no.
Would it help refresh your recollection if you saw your statement to police? I may have one moment, Your Honor. Your Honor, if I may approach, this is page 6 out of 15. It's a supplemental report number 3. I'm showing it to counsel before.
Yes,
May I
you may
approach?
approach.
Thank you.
I'm gonna have you just read that. Don't read it out loud, just to yourself, and then when you're done reading it, let us know.
That help refresh your recollection? Thank you. So I'll ask it again. Did you, the defendant communicate to you that there were concerns about Darrell Jr. throughout the day of August 30th?
Yes.
Okay, and what were those concerns?
That he wasn't eating. He was shaking.
Thank you. Your Honor, may I approach the retrieve
Yes.
report? Thank you. Did you have, when you came home and saw your baby and you explained already Darrell Jr. had some clear signs of a seizure, do you remember saying anything to the defendant?
Yes.
Okay, and what did you say? You asked him what he did? Did he respond to you?
Yes.
Question. Deja, from when Darrell Jr. was born until he passed, other than this incident, was he involved in any, like a car crash or anything, any accidents, anything like that? Thank you. Nothing further at this point, Your Honor.
All right, cross-examination.
Deja, may I call you that as well? My name is Sam Bernstein. I'm Mr. Hicks's attorney. I'm going to be asking you a series of questions, just like Ms. Tanhut. Some of them might be similar to what you've already answered. It's just part of the process, okay? So you and Mr. Hicks had like a co-parenting relationship?
Yes.
And could you describe that for me, please?
I work, you work, so, 4 days.
You said you flipped days?
Mhm.
Like you alternated who took care of Darrel Jr. on which day? Like you switched over every other day?
Yes.
Okay. And I think your testimony was that he saw Darrel Jr. like close to every day.
Yes.
Would you describe him as being involved in Darrel Jr.'s life?
Yes.
Did Mr. Hicks know Darrel Jr.'s routines? Did he know like when the baby slept, when the baby had a bottle?
Object, Your Honor, she can't testify as to what Mr. Hicks knew, so maybe if the question can be repeated.
For yourself.
Did you observe Mr. Hicks? Like, did you see with your own eyes him care for the child?
Yes.
And based on what he was doing, did it look like he, knew when the baby slept?
Yes.
Did he know how to change the baby's diaper?
No, you have to learn.
Sure. No, I know. We have to learn how to change a diaper, but did he eventually learn how to change a diaper?
Yes.
And did you see him give the baby baths?
Yes.
And did he feed the baby as well?
Yes.
Did you see Mr. Hicks knowing like what Darrel Jr. would eat as far as the bottles go? Were you comfortable with Mr. Hicks watching the baby?
Yes.
Excuse me one more. Alan, can you check that hallway and tell us they need to quiet down? Is it over there? Thank you. Go ahead.
Feels like the PD's judge. I mean, what about what Mr. Hicks was doing that made you comfortable with him watching Darrel Jr.? Had you ever seen Mr. Hicks handle his son in like a rough manner?
No.
Did you ever see Mr. Hicks like yell or shout at the baby? You have a son named Caden as well,
Yes.
and Caden was like 4 years old at the time. And did Mr. Hicks supervise Caden as well sometimes?
Yes.
Did Mr. Hicks have like something of a relationship with Caden too? They knew each other somewhat, yeah. Would Mr. Hicks supervise the baby and Caden at the same time?
Majority of.
Would you already know? Okay, but sometimes?
Yes.
How often would they do that? Okay. And obviously, Caden was with Mr. Hicks for a little bit the evening that you went out, right?
Yes.
How long was Mr. Hicks watching Caden and Darrel Jr. that evening that you went out? Okay, so Caden was there the whole night? Okay. The next morning, you're still out. There's a social worker that comes over, right?
Yes.
You said the social worker came over at 11 or noon?
supposed to come in when she came.
She came at 11. Between the time that you left that evening and the next morning, you had communicated with Mr. Hicks.
Yeah.
What types of communications did you guys have?
Before we went to bed. And he was putting him in bed
Do you know how many FaceTimes did you guys have?
that day.
Well, between the time that you left and when, and 11 o'clock the next day.
It was two. One before bed, and then one with the, social worker. Or,
FaceTime with a social worker?
yes,
Okay. Did Mr. Hicks send you communications outside of FaceTime?
no,
Were there any like phone calls or text messages? How many times did you guys call? Sure, that's fair. I know it's a long time ago. Do you remember what you guys talked about on those phone calls?
and the next day was with the social worker. And we talked.
So the next morning after the overnight and before the social worker came over, did you talk with Mr. Hicks that morning? Did you talk with Mr. Hicks before the social worker came over? When's the first time that you heard about the arm twitching? You're saying the first time that you heard about the arm twitching is when you found your son later the afternoon that you came home? Did you talk about the arm twitching with the social worker? After what?
Ask questions. Yeah.
Would it help refresh your memory if you like saw the police report where you talked to the detective about all this? Like you did with Ms. Tanha? Okay. It's 8, but it might be like 6 to 8.
Did you need a break, ma'am?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Okay, go ahead. You can step down. All right. Now. You may be seated. Okay. All right, man, you can come back up. Get Mr. Hicks out here. Okay. Did she say she wanted so much? Good.
I'm fine, thanks.
All right, we're back on the record in the case of the People versus Hicks. Witnesses on the stand. Ma'am, I just need to remind you, and I'm sure you know, you're still under oath. All right. And if you, even though it seemed like you just did, but if you need another break, you just say so. All right. And we'll do what we can. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. To those that are in the courtroom, after I had left the bench, there were certain reports to me. I'm not going to get into all the details for who did what along those lines, but I'm just going to say this. I expect that everyone will have proper decorum while they are in this courtroom. There will not be any yelling back and forth or going at each other in any way. If I get any hint of that, I will have you removed. And I will make no bones about it. This is the only warning that you're going to get. This is tough enough, quite frankly, for this witness to testify to, regardless of where you stand on this. And that this other stuff is just not needed, and I will not be having it. So I hope everybody understands that, understands my admonition to you, and understand that I will enforce it. Mr. Bernstein, you may continue your cross-examination.
Yeah, I was asking you about the first time that you heard about Darrel Jr. shaking or twitching. And I think where we left off, I think you had said that the first time you noticed twitching or shaking was when you came home that day.
Yeah.
And I wanted to refresh your memory. Is it possible that you spoke with Mr. Hicks and the social worker about the twitching at the time of the home visit?
No, I do not.
Would it help refresh your memory if I showed you what you said to the police when you spoke with them? Your Honor, may I approach after showing this?
Yes.
Yeah.
I remember.
Okay, I have to get it back from you though real quick. Sorry. I'll refresh my memory. Okay, so after looking at that, do you have a better recollection of the timeline there?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, so do you remember a conversation with Mr. Hicks and the social worker about twitching and shaking?
Just to clarify, it wasn't a conversation with the social worker present, it was just me and her. She wasn't there.
Okay, so you had a conversation with Mr. Hicks on the phone about the shaking? When was that?
That was like, literally, she was walking out of the door and he called. She wasn't present to clarify that it was his nerves. That's what he told me.
I mean, did you tell the officers that you got a call from Senior and the at-home nurse stating that Junior was shaking?
No,
Did you tell the detectives that, that you were told that Junior's arms were twitching?
No.
Do you remember having a conversation with the social worker that you were told that it is normal for babies to do that for the development of their nervous system? Do you remember telling the detective when you spoke with him that in speaking with the social worker, you were told that it's normal for babies to do that for their development of their nervous system?
yes,
Okay, so there was a conversation with the at-home nurse about the twitching.
after the fact, all of this occurred and going to hospital. Yes, that was discussed.
Did you discuss it? Did you discuss it with the at-home nurse?
Not that day, no.
Did you have a FaceTime conversation with the at-home social worker?
No.
Okay. Did you have any
You said at-home nurse, and then you said social worker. Are we talking about the same person?
Yeah.
We are, Your Honor.
I just want to make sure his question is directed.
She's technically a social worker, but everyone in the report calls her a nurse, so it's just a little
That's
confusing.
fine. I just want to make sure that we're talking about the same person.
Okay. So you don't remember having any conversation with Mr. Hicks and the social worker together about twitching? You don't remember? Is it possible that you did? Is it your testimony that the first time you heard about the twitching was Mr. Hicks telling you later after the child went to the hospital?
Yes,
You testified earlier when Ms. Tanho was asking you questions that you went home because you wanted to see your baby because you missed him? Is it possible that you went home because you were concerned about some twitching and shaking?
No.
Did you talk to the detective about, I kept hearing my baby crying in the back of my mind and felt that I needed to go home and check on him?
Yes,
Okay, so why did you tell the detective that?
because I believe in God, and I feel that God was calling me to go get my son. I don't know why, but randomly, yes, it happened.
Okay. Is it possible that you said those things because you were told by people that your baby was twitching and that you needed to go check on him?
No, I was never told he was twitching or nothing.
When you spoke with Detective Yeager, you said that you didn't have any concerns that Mr. Hicks did anything to the baby?
No.
You didn't say that?
Wait,
Did you tell the detective when you spoke with him that you did not have any concerns about Mr. Hicks doing anything to the baby? You didn't say that? Do you,
Wait, when you say concern, you mean like in a moment of something happening to my son? No.
Okay.
I wasn't concerned, that's his father.
I want to go back to, you stated, I had asked you about talking with the detective and talking about some of the things that you said about what might or might not be normal for babies to do. Did you read that when I gave you the police report? No.
I'm all over the place, trying to take everything.
I understand. Wait, did you said you want me to refresh your memory?
Yes.
Okay. Let me just show. So like, I'm not trying to like beat you up here. We're just trying to figure out the timeline of everything, okay? I mean, after reading it, does that help refresh your memory that you may have had a conversation with the at-home nurse and Mr. Hicks about the baby twitching or shaking and whether it's normal or not?
All I remember is he did call me and she had got there. He hung up before she talked to me. So whatever him and the nurse discussed, I wasn't on the phone, is what I'm telling you. She never said that to me. It came out of Darrel Sr. mouth, what she said,
So when you told the detective that you got a call from Senior and the at-home nurse, which were your words, stating that Junior was shaking, that what you said is false?
I'm gonna,
Oh, is it,
if we can just, I think there's some confusion, so.
There
if we
is.
rephrase,
hold on a second. Go ahead. Stand there. Go ahead.
If Mr. Bernstein could kindly rephrase, I think we could get, and kind of get straight to the point, of asking a direct question, maybe
yeah.
that would.
All right. And if we could, Mr. Proctor, because I think some of the questions also can have double answers, and I don't know if she's answering what's contained within the question or the question itself, which is making it difficult for me to follow.
Mhm.
So,
Well, let me just,
Sorry, and while I'm objecting, there's been a lot of hearsay and I've kind of let it go to
Yes.
develop testimony, but please be mindful.
well, I'm not offering anything for the truth of the matter. I'm just figuring out the general timeline. Let me just phrase it like this, and maybe this will cut it off. Did you have any conversation whatsoever with the at-home social worker that day? Okay. Thank you, Your Honor. I don't appreciate it.
thank you. Any redirect?
Deja, are you doing okay to keep going for a little bit? Okay. Deja, how do you feel about being here today to testify?
Angry, betrayed.
This was fall of last year. Do you feel like you have a clear memory of everything or some things a little fuzzy?
Some things are fuzzy.
Defense counsel asked about defendant watching your son Caden sometimes as well.
Yes.
Before this incident, were you comfortable with him watching Caden?
Yes.
Had Caden indicated to you in any way that he was uncomfortable with defendant before this incident?
Hold on, whoa, what? Did Caden say something? My objection is hearsay, Your Honor.
Well, I don't know. It's going to be offered for the state of mind. I'm going to allow it.
Thank you. Do you want me to ask the question again? I know it's a lot. Had Caden in any way indicated to you that he was concerned about defendant being around him or watching him before this incident?
No.
Did that change after this incident?
Yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right. I just have one question for you. Man, when you came home, you said that you went into your bedroom,
Yes.
right? Where was the baby at that point?
On my bed in his body pillow.
Got it. Okay. So it was on your bed and, okay,
Yes.
thank you. All right. Any questions based on the court's questions?
Here, Your Honor.
All right. Ma'am, you may step. Thank you.
Your Honor, may this witness be excused?
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
This witness is excused.
People call Dr. Carla Parkin Joseph listening.
Doctor, if you could please come forward and be sworn.
Take a seat, raise your right hand. You solemnly swear to affirm the testimony you're about to give to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
See, state, spell your first and last name for the record, please.
My name is Carla Parkin Joseph, CarlaParkin-Joseph.
You may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Parkin Joseph, could you please tell the court where you're employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed at Michigan Medicine, the CS Mott Children's Hospital. I am a child abuse pediatrician on the child protection team there.
Thank you. Are you a licensed physician in the state of Michigan?
Yes, I am.
And are you board certified?
Yes, I am.
Could you briefly tell the court about your educational and training history?
Yes, after my undergraduate studies, I completed my bachelor's degree at the University of Toledo College of Medicine in 2010. From there, I went on to my general pediatric residency training at the Children's Hospital of Michigan in downtown Detroit. I stayed an additional year after that 3-year training program as the chief general pediatric resident, and then continued my training in Philadelphia from 2014 to 2017, and that was for my fellowship training in child abuse pediatrics. I completed that in 2017 and then came back to Michigan and have been at my position at the University of Michigan since 2017.
Thank you. Your Honor, may I approach?
You may.
Before I do so, I'm showing defense counsel Dr. Parkin Joseph's CV, which has been sent to him already. Doctor, I'm gonna hand you what's been marked as people's proposed exhibit number 1. Could you please tell the court what that is?
This is my curriculum vitae.
Thank you. Your Honor, at this point, I would move for admission of the doctor's curriculum vitae.
The objection to that. Your
All
Honor.
right. Exhibit 1 is admitted.
Thank you. Your Honor, may I publish it to the court?
Yes.
And doctor, have you testified in court before?
Yes, I have.
Approximately how many times?
At least 50.
And have you been qualified as an expert before?
Yes, I have.
In what field?
In child abuse pediatrics.
And have you been qualified in child abuse pediatrics in this county previously?
Yes, I have.
Your Honor, at this point, I would move to qualify the doctor as an expert under MRE 702.
Could I just ask a couple questions?
Objection of order.
Can I wind your ear?
You may.
Do you want to come up here?
Sure. Just a second. Oh, yeah. Thank you, doctor. Just some general questions. So could you define for us the field of child abuse pediatrics, please?
Yeah, so it is now a American Board of Pediatrics certified fellowship training. So it is a subspecialty within pediatrics that focuses on all types of child maltreatment. So physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, medical child abuse, all types of maltreatment, and the evaluation, diagnosis, and treatment of those conditions.
Okay, so your patients are children that are the victims of suspected abuse?
Yes, suspected victims, yes. And I'm providing an opinion regarding whether abuse and neglect played a part in that child's clinical presentation.
You're trained in like the different mechanisms of abuse, like how this stuff happens and how it relates to the body?
Yes,
Okay. And your training enables you to kind of piece together what may or may not have happened in any way?
potentially, yes.
Okay. Well, when you say potentially, what do you mean exactly?
So at times there is a history that is provided or a potential mechanism of an injury, which I would kind of relate to the medical knowledge in the field to see if those injuries are consistent, with the ultimately diagnosed injuries as well. So sometimes there is a history that is provided at other times. Probably more difficult is when there is no history in order to really pinpoint an exact cause.
Okay, that's fair. And so if there's no history provided, there might be some limitations on your ability to say something.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I'll have more later, but Judge, I have no objection.
All right.
Proposed.
Without objection, the doctor is so called.
Doctor, were you involved in evaluating a patient named Darrel Hicks Jr.?
Yes.
And how old was he when the case came to you?
I believe he was 7 weeks old. I saw him.
When and how did the case come to you?
So the case was brought to my team, the child protection team, after he had been admitted to CS Mott Children's Hospital and other medical professionals had concern for physical abuse as a cause or as a due to the injuries that were identified in Darrel.
And I'll ask you some questions about that, but before I do, did you personally observe Darrel Hicks Jr.?
Yes, I did.
Your Honor, if I may approach, before I do so, showing defense counsel people's proposed exhibit number 2. May I approach?
Yes, you may.
Doctor, I'm handing you people's proposed exhibit number 2. If you could please tell the court if you recognize what that is.
Yes, this is a photograph of Darrel in his hospital bed. And this is what he looked like at the time I observed him.
And when you say Darrel, are you referring to Darrel Hicks Jr.? Just to be clear. Thank you. Your Honor, I would move to admit people's proposed exhibit number 2 at this point.
Any objection of order?
None, Your Honor.
Exhibit 2 is admitted. Thank you.
So when you saw Darrel Jr., what did you note upon seeing him or examining him?
So he did have many medical interventions that were already in place. And So he had EEG, which is electrodes that are placed on the scalp in order to monitor brain activity. He also had a monitor that was actually placed inside his skull operatively to monitor pressure inside his skull. He was intubated and mechanically ventilated. So he had a tube placed down his throat in order to help him breathe. And had a number of other vascular lines, so IVs and other access.
Thank you. And what was the process in evaluating him medically? Could you tell us about that?
So in addition to my physical examination, I also gathered history by reviewing medical records. So what was available in the University of Michigan records. And also reviewed laboratory testing, so blood work that had been completed, as well as radiology studies. Darrel Jr. had a CT scan of his head, MRI of his brain, X-rays performed as well. So I reviewed those personally and with a radiologist as well.
I want to kind of take them one at a time. So you mentioned the CT scan. Could you tell us what the results of the CT scan indicated?
So the CT scan was performed just a few hours after Darrel Jr. had presented to the hospital. And that CT scan showed evidence of swelling of the brain, in addition to some scattered areas of bleeding or hemorrhage inside the skull that appeared to be between the surface of the brain and the inner surface of the skull.
And what did those injuries indicate to you? What would those suggest?
So the bleeding inside the skull would suggest potentially some trauma. And then with the swelling and signs of poor blood flow and oxygen flow to the brain would again suggest that there was some injury that occurred.
What did you do next after the CT scan, or what was done next?
So after the CT scan, Darrel Jr. was admitted to our pediatric intensive care unit. And just a few hours after that, actually into August 31st, he had an MRI of his brain as well.
And what is the purpose of the MRI following the CT scan?
So there are some limitations to the CT scan. It does not give great pictures of the brain tissue itself. So it just gives it a clearer picture of the injury that we're seeing inside the skull, and also again to look at that brain tissue to see if there were any additional injuries.
And what were the results of the MRI?
So it confirmed again that there was bleeding or hemorrhage between the surface of the brain and the inner surface of the skull. And again, showed evidence of poor blood flow again and poor oxygen to the brain. There was pretty diffuse brain injury at that point.
And did that confirm what the CT scan had shown? And did that provide any additional information on top of the CT scan, or is it more of a confirmation?
More confirmation.
And what was the next procedure after the results of the MRI came back?
So I believe that he had the X-rays done next. We call that a skeletal survey. So it's a set of X-rays, usually about at least 20. That looks at all of the areas of his body, so from his skull all the way down to his toes and hands, and to evaluate for any skeletal injury, any fractures, broken bones.
And was there anything concerning on the X-rays?
So in Darrel Jr.'s right tibia, which is the bone that you can feel in the front of the shin, but down at the end nearest his ankle, There was a bony fragment that was seen on the X-ray that suggested potentially that there was a fracture at the end of that bone.
Did you also, well, what did you do after the X-ray was completed?
So I believe after the X-ray that Darrel Jr. was taken to the operating room with the pediatric neurosurgery team. And that is when that monitor was placed inside his skull to monitor the pressure inside.
And what was that monitor indicating?
So at the time that it was placed, the goal would be for the pressure to be approximately 15 millimeters of mercury, but at the time of its placement, it was in the mid-20s. So it would suggest that there was certainly increased pressure inside his head.
Was there also an eye exam conducted?
Yes, there was.
And could you tell the court the results of that eye exam?
So the pediatric ophthalmology team evaluated Darrel Jr. And they found hemorrhaging or bleeding in the retina, which is at the back of the eye, in both eyes. Those areas of bleeding in the retina were diffuse, just being widespread and really covering all of the retina. They were very numerous, too numerous to count, even to individualize each of the spots of bleeding in each of the hemorrhages. And they were also in multiple layers of the retina. So they were just very widespread.
And based on your training and experience, what does that suggest to you?
So that pattern and the nature of those retinal hemorrhages is most consistent with an abusive etiology that is seen typically with an acceleration, deceleration type injury.
Is that what's referred to as kind of shaken baby or a shaking movement?
Yes.
You mentioned that you reviewed other medical records. Did you review birth records for Darrel Jr.?
Yes. Darrel Jr. was born at the University of Michigan, so there was access to that information as well as his pediatrician records as well.
And was there anything from the birth records or the pediatrician records that indicated any concerns related to or would be associated with the injuries that you saw?
Really a normal delivery and really normal pediatrician.
And when you say pediatrician records after, are those like well visits essentially?
Yes.
For the baby? And those were normal as well?
Yes.
After evaluating Darrel Jr., reviewing the medical records, taking the history, putting it all together, did you have a diagnosis? Okay. And what was that diagnosis?
Abusive head trauma or physical abuse.
Could you please tell the court what injuries were specifically consistent with the diagnosis of abusive head trauma?
The inside the skull that I described, as well as the diffuse swelling of the brain, likely secondary injury to the brain as a result of that lack of blood flow and lack of oxygen delivery to the brain, as well as the retinal hemorrhaging. Again, it was of a pattern or nature that would be most consistent with abusive head trauma. And then ultimately, with further imaging, there was also confirmation of the fracture described at on the right tibia.
And with the confirmation of the fracture, what's that indicative of when you see a fracture like that in a case like this?
So this particular fracture was just described as a corner fracture, which just meant that it looks like there was a chip on the corner of the bone. But at that location, typically those types of fractures are due to some shear forces at the joints, as well as tension, so almost pulling apart of that joint as well. So in the medical literature, those particular types of fractures are highly specific for abusive injury. They have been reported to be associated with shaking, so that the extremities are kind of flailing, and then that produces those tensile and shear forces at the joints that would cause these types of injuries. At other times, the corner fractures have also been described from like a yanking on an extremity, or even picking an infant up by that extremity. So almost using that extremity as like a handle or lever.
In these types of cases, when a patient is presented to the hospital, do you instantly look for, was this abusive or not, or do you start in a more general fashion?
So yes, the medical team definitely started with a more broad differential diagnosis. So thinking about all the possibilities that could lead to the seizure-like activity that Darrel Jr. actually presented with. So there was consideration given to other neurologic causes of seizures. If you have, epilepsy or some are, some kind of seizure disorder that might be causing this. There was consideration given to infection. So it's placed on antibiotics as well. But again, the imaging that was really towards.
Okay. Based on your training and experience, what's the relationship between the severity of the injuries and onset of symptoms?
So in abusive head trauma, the more severe cases will typically present more immediately, so closer in time frame to their development.
And was this a case you would, where the injuries would be classified as severe?
Yeah.
One moment.
Yes.
Nothing further right now. Thank you.
All right. Cross-examination.
Doctor, I'm going to pick up where Ms. Tanha left off. She talked about the onset of symptoms. And it seems like, is it possible that twitching or shaking is one of the symptoms that might go along with these types of injuries?
Yes.
How long would you estimate that the onset of twitching or shaking would arise after such an injury like this?
I would say my best guess would be hours at most, but could be even shorter as minutes after an injury.
Okay. How many hours, like at the maximum?
With like seizure-like activity, I would say maybe up to 24 at most.
Okay. When that twitching or shaking is observed, I mean, is it fair to say that it's important to bring a child to the hospital right away?
Yes, if there's seizure-like activity. Like that.
In looking, in one of the, something that happens along with the injuries is that the brain doesn't get oxygen, right? And that can result in further injuries.
Correct, yeah.
In your notes, in the medical records, it seemed like you had a concern for medical neglect.
Initially, yes.
You thought that Darrel Jr. had evidence of hypoxic ischemic brain injury.
Yes.
Could you explain that?
So hypoxic just means low oxygen, and then ischemic meaning that there's no blood flow.
Okay.
What I was describing, I just didn't use those.
Sure. It seems like in your notes, you stated that injury presented at the time that he came to the hospital.
Yeah.
And in your notes, you write that the development of like such a problem, may have been affected had the child been brought to the hospital sooner.
Yes, I think, identification of a problem and then evaluation and treatment of that problem would absolutely, yes.
Okay. Okay. you said could potentially change the outcome. How is that? Like the treatment could reverse or not reverse, but like help prevent it from getting worse?
Yes, I believe that, yes, that he was treated in a timely manner. The medical professionals might be able to slow the progression, of that, injury as a result of lack of blood flow and oxygen delivery.
Okay. It seems like when we're talking about the abusive head trauma, the shaken baby stuff, it's the brain moving around in the skull, right? That leads to the bleeding and the swelling.
Yeah.
And you had testified that often that can be from acceleration or deceleration,
Correct, yeah.
like a back and forth movement.
Yes.
It also can come from like impact as well. And something like in this case that, we don't have any evidence of like, skull fracture or anything, right?
That's correct, yeah.
But this type of injury could be caused from an impact with like a soft surface,
Potentially.
like a couch or a mattress.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me ask you about further these types of injuries. Could this be caused, if a child is like aggressively picked up from the armpits and like rocked back and forth?
I would expect that the injury would be violent and repetitive as well. So I don't think that it would occur from typical.
What about if the child was picked up and the child's head hit something like the person's arm?
If that was the only injury, I would not expect this substantial injury.
What about, and I'm going to ask you if all these things in combination, I'll just save the suspense, what could possibly add up, right? What about picking up the child's head without support and the head like flop back?
Again, I would expect it to be repetitive. So I would not expect this pattern of injury with that history.
What about dropping the child onto a bed?
Again, I wouldn't expect the extent of injury.
But dropping a child on the bed, that could lead to the brain moving around, right?
Yes.
And once that brain moves around, that can lead to swelling of the brain.
Well, if there's injury to the brain tissue, cause that swelling.
Right. So, and I had asked you earlier if the brain could move around and like that type of scenario and impact with a soft surface. And you said that the brain could do that. And then also, I guess that leads from it that the brain could, there could be bleeding from that kind of impact as well, right?
Yeah, well, I think that bleeding from the movement of the brain inside the skull, yes.
Okay. And I mean, all the actions I'm describing, in some way, there's like a lack of support to the head, right?
Yes, so the head would be basically able to move somewhat freely.
And that's part of the problem with shaken babies is that the head is not being supported while something else is happening, right?
Well, yes, there's repetitive again forces being applied to the child's head.
Right, and if there's not support to, stop the acceleration or deceleration, that's when problems arise.
Yes, that's when that bleeding happens. That's when the injury to the brain and swelling can occur.
I heard you say that you had a diagnosis. It was like a most likely diagnosis. I'm gonna have to ask you what that means, most likely diagnosis.
So I was not present and did not see immediately, before or kind of what the inciting event specifically was. But in, again, evaluating Darrel Jr. while we were in the hospital, there was what we call a differential diagnosis. So which is basically a list of possible problems that could lead to his clinical presentation. Through the course of his hospitalization, through the imaging, the lab testing, the medical team was able to, rule out some of those possibilities. And then some of those, studies also provided support to other possibilities. So once everything was completed and injuries that I outlined previously were found, I believe that abusive head trauma is most likely diagnosis.
And we had talked earlier about like limitations in coming up with something. Were you able to read any police reports?
No, I only read police reports.
Did you have access to any statements from the parents as like the investigation went on about admissions or statements about what happened?
I believe, yes, that I had just conversations with police about some possible histories or mechanisms of injury.
Okay. Thank you, Doctor. I have no more questions.
All right, any redirect?
Just a few. Doctor, how important, if at all, is the history you receive from, let's say, a caregiver or parent when a child comes to the hospital?
So I believe it's important so that medical professionals can kind of tailor the treatment, to or again kind of move those potential diagnoses around in that list of what's more likely. So if we're given a history of an injury or a potential injury, then we might be able to kind of look for additional injuries, or again kind of potentially get to imaging and diagnosis sooner.
So would it be fair to say that it's important that history is as accurate as it possibly can be?
Yeah.
You were asked about kind of different scenarios where the baby's head might hit a person's arm, where the head might not be supported. Would any of that describe or be consistent with the injuries that you saw in Darrel Jr.?
No,
Including the fracture to the tibia?
that's correct, yes.
And you were asked why you call it a most likely diagnosis, and of course you said it's because you weren't there, you didn't see what happened. Is that common in your field of work, is that there aren't people who are what we would call witnesses to what happened?
That's correct.
Thank you. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Can I ask one follow-up, Your Honor?
You may.
Doctor, you said you had access to the University of Michigan records. Did you also have access to the records created by Tia Braxton?
I believe so. She is part of the Metropolitan Health Program.
Well, she is the at-home social worker that does the home visits. And were you able to review those as well?
Yes.
Did you review the notes for the day that Darrel Jr. was admitted to the hospital?
Yes.
And are you able to share what those notes say?
I'm going to object, Your Honor. At this point, that's hearsay unless there's some reason there's not.
Respond.
Well, I'm just trying to figure out how what's in those notes plays a role in her diagnosis.
Right. No, I get that, but I'm going to sustain the objection.
Okay. I guess we'll have to ask her.
Thank you. Anything else, Ms. Tan?
No, thank you.
Thank you, doctor. You may step down. This witness can be excused. No objection. This witness is excused. You may call your next witness.
You will call Dr. Carl Schmidt.
Take a seat, raise your right hand. You solemnly swear and affirm the testimony you're about to give the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. State and spell your first and last name for the record, please.
My name is Carl, C-A-R-L, Schmidt, S-C-H-M-I-D-T.
You may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. Hi, Dr. Schmidt. Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for your patience. Dr. Schmidt, could you please tell the court where you were employed in August of 2024 and in what capacity?
At the University of Michigan Department of Pathology, professor of pathology. Also, Deputy Washington Continental Exam.
Thank you. Could you please tell the court about your educational background and training?
I'm a physician, licensed practice resident in Ohio, Michigan, and Washington State. I have residency or specialty training in anatomic and clinical pathology. Then I have subspecialty training in forensic pathology. And I am board certified by the American Board of Pathology in anatomic, clinical, and forensic pathology.
Thank you. Your Honor, if I may approach and I'll show defense counsel what's been marked as People's Proposed Exhibit number 3. He was also sent that before the hearing today.
Is it 3? Yes, you may. Go ahead.
Dr. Schmidt, I'm handing you what's been marked as People's Proposed Exhibit 3. If you could please tell the court if you recognize what that is.
Thank you. Your Honor, I would move to admit the CB, People's Proposed Exhibit 3.
Any objection or voir dire?
No objection.
CB is admitted, Exhibit 3.
Thank you. Dr. Schmidt, have you testified in court before?
I have
Approximately how many times?
at least 400 to 500 times.
Have you been qualified in court as an expert before?
I have
In what field?
mainly anatomic, clinical, and forensic pathology.
Thank you. Your Honor, at this point, I would move to qualify Dr. Schmidt as an expert under MRE 702.
Any objection, voir dire? Pardon?
No objection.
All right.
That's a lot of court appearances.
All right. And this witness is so qualified.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Schmidt, could you tell us a little bit about what forensic pathology is?
Forensic pathology is the branch of pathology that studies how and why people die, the changes that occur in tissue as a result of the process of death. Not only with trauma, but also with natural disease. And we also look at laboratory sensing.
Thank you. And as part of the position you had in August of 2024, and I'm sorry, August and September, I should say, of 2024, did you perform and supervise autopsies?
Yes.
Could you just briefly tell us the procedure for autopsies?
So the autopsy is basically consists of 2 parts. The first is where you do a basic general exam of the body that includes things like height and weight, as well as looking for external evidence of disease as well as injury. And after you're done with that, then you proceed to what is probably more popularly thought of what happens during an autopsy, where you open the cavity of the head, chest, abdomen, pelvis, look at the internal organs, and you make a correlation with what you see in the internal organs and the external as well.
And did you supervise the autopsy of Darrel Hicks Jr.?
I did.
And as a part of the autopsy process, would you complete a report documenting findings and conclusions?
Yeah.
Was a report completed in this case?
Yeah.
Was it completed at or near the time of the autopsy examination?
It was sometime after the autopsy exam because there were several procedures that we had to do that were started at the time of the autopsy, but could not be completed until later.
Okay. And I'm going to ask you a little bit more about the procedures in a moment. Before I do, Your Honor, may I approach, again, I'm showing defense counsel what's been marked as People's Proposed Exhibit number 4, but he should have that as part of the discovery.
All right. Yes, you may approach.
Thank you.
Dr. Schmidt, I'm handing you what's been marked as People's Proposed Exhibit number 4. Could you please tell the court if you recognize what that is?
This is a copy of the autopsy results generated in the case of Darrel Hicks.
And how do you know it's associated with the case of Darrel Hicks?
Because it has his name on it and it has an autopsy number generated as part of the Washington County Medical Examiner. Record keeping, it also has an autopsy number, which is the way that it's kept track. The Department of Pathology State of Texas.
Thank you, Your Honor. At this point, I would move to admit People's Proposed Exhibit number 4 into evidence.
Any objection or voir dire?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, exhibit 4 is admitted.
Thank you. May I approach with exhibits 3 and 4, Your Honor, to publish? So Dr. Schmidt, I'm going to ask you some questions about that report, but before I do, at the conclusion of the examination of Darrel Hicks Jr., was there a determination as to the cause of death? And what was that determination?
Abusive head trauma.
And was there a determination as to the manner of death in the case of Darrel Hicks Jr.?
Homicide.
Could you please tell the court what injuries you noted on Darrel Hicks Jr. specifically that led to those determinations?
Well, the first is that he had something called diffuse subarachnoid hemorrhage. So the brain is covered by a very fine membrane, which has a very rich blood supply. And when that membrane becomes a little bit hemorrhage, that's what we say that it's subarachnoid. So basically, the entire surface of the brain was painted with this subarachnoid. Then there were scattered subdural hemorrhages. Basically, there was a subdural hemorrhage is a hemorrhage that is a clot that occupies the space between the skull and the surface of the brain. So a subarachnoid hemorrhage will sit on top of the subdural hemorrhage will be sitting on top of a subarachnoid hemorrhage. So it's a sandwich, if you will. You have the skull, then the subdural space, then the subarachnoid, and then the brain itself. Another way to think about a subdural hemorrhage is that when you open the skull, you peel away a subdural hemorrhage, whereas a subarachnoid hemorrhage is painted on the surface of the brain. A subarachnoid hemorrhage is an indicator of trauma. And in this case, it was basically all over the surface of the brain, called diffusely spread across both hemispheres, especially more weighted towards the left side of the brain. But the subdural hemorrhage extended down to the brain called the cerebellum, which is kind of like a smaller version of the brain that's seated next to the brainstem. So I guess the long and the short of it is that there was extensive subarachnoid, basically covering the entire surface of the brain, except for a small patch. Then there was what we call diffuse hypoxic ischemia. What that means is that the brain was deprived of oxygen because of decreased circulation. When this child suffered the trauma that resulted in all this hemorrhage, there was inflammation of the brain. And as the brain swells, there is an increase of pressure within the skull. The skull is basically a hard enclosure. And as the brain tries to swell, there's not much room for the brain to swell because the skull is itself helping to contain the pressure that builds up. And at some point, pressure builds up to the point where it exceeds the ability of blood pressure to pump blood through to the brain. So that, again, we call the hypoxic injury, which is basically that loss of blood flow that happens to the brain as the increase in pressure within the skull impedes the ability of blood to flow into the brain. I hope that's.
Thank you.
And then there were patches of hemorrhage within the cortex. You will see that the autopsy report, there's something called IE. What that means, it's a bruise that happened because of tearing or sliding of the cortex over the white matter inside the brain. It's basically two layers of brain with different densities sliding over each other as trauma was inflicted. And when that happens, there are blood vessels that are keeping those two layers of the brain together and they get torn. So you get the hemorrhage, which we call tearing. Then there was the hemorrhage in the optic, in the retinas and the optic nerve. So to do that, we look at the eyes directly, and there was hemorrhage within the retina, which is the pigment, that black pigment layer in the back of the eye. Like that was also infiltrated. Hemorrhage. There was hemorrhage in the optic nerve, the right optic nerve that comes out of the eye. And there was also hemorrhage in the neck. At the spinal, there are 7 cervical vertebrae, and in levels 5 and 7, there was hemorrhage in the nerve roots that come out of the vertebrae, out of the nerves out of the spine at that time.
Thank you. Did you note anything in particular regarding the essentially the skeleton, if you will, like bones? Was there anything noted?
No, well, not in the head, but there was a fracture of the right tibia, injury to the growth plate.
Could you tell us a little bit about that, please?
So it was in the bottom of the tibia, is what we call the distal tibia, which is to the ankle, to the knee. And basically there was trauma inflicted to that part of the leg, which resulted in breaking the growth plate. And you can see that there was hemorrhage in the growth plate, and we actually removed that part of the leg and took sections from it to look under the microscope. And you could see that there was hemorrhage there.
So going back to the injuries you observed in the head, what does that indicate to you? What does that suggest to you may have happened to cause those injuries?
You can think of injury as a transfer of energy to tissue. There is no injury that happens without hemorrhage being transferred to tissue. So this is a pretty extensive injury. The diffuse subarachnoid subdural hemorrhage, intense swelling of the brain that causes the pressure of the brain to rise to a point where it basically heated blood flow into the brain. All this is a catastrophic event, which leads me to think that something really bad happened in this child very acutely. I can't tell you exactly what it was. For several reasons. One is this child had actually survived for 8 days, 6, 7, or 8 days after he was admitted to the hospital. But this child was either shaken, that's one possibility, or his head was impacted against a padded surface. A padded surface would help spread out injury, and thus you would not see any injury on the skin as a result of being struck on a padded surface.
When you're conducting these examinations or supervising them, do you also consider the history of, did this child have a normal birth? Have there been any previous issues prior to the onset of symptoms that led to this? Okay. In this case, was there anything that had occurred, to the best of your knowledge, that would lead to these injuries from the medical records prior to this child coming to the hospital in August and September?
It was not.
And how does that play into your diagnosis?
Well, it just lends weight to the diagnosis of trauma as being the reason behind all these changes.
And you mentioned, you used the word acute. Could you describe to us what you mean by that?
It means that a lot of this happened with a very short period of time. This child was apparently well until the moment that he wasn't, and then he developed seizures, became abducted, and was taken to the hospital. This happened within a very narrow period of time, which is supportive of the fact this was a major injury suffering.
I do want to ask you about going back to the tibia, the right tibia. And you noted acute fracture of the distal metaphysis at the, I'm not going to try to pronounce all of that, but I'm referring to page 8 out of 10 of your report.
Okay.
What type of movement might cause that kind of injury to the tibia?
You know what? Hold on one moment. Young man. Yeah. Yep. Side, Mr. Hannah.
I'm sorry, Your Honor.
I want to move to the side. Bring him up here. What's your name?
Ashton,
Pardon?
Ashton.
I gave a warning. You were in here when I gave the warning. No, don't even try it. I saw how you walked out. I saw how you looked at him. I saw how you flipped your head. I didn't want to see that. I asked that everybody be respectful to everybody else. All right, so if you come back in this courtroom ever, you make sure you behave yourself accordingly. Understood?
Yes, sir.
You can go.
Doctor, I'm going to ask you a question again, referencing page 8 out of 10 of your report regarding the right tibia. What type of movement might cause that type of an injury?
This can only be caused by one of two things. One of them is the leg was impacted against the surface such that it caused the growth plate to get displaced. This is not a fracture like an adult where the bone hits something and because of the impact at that point, the bone splits. This is cartilage. It's growth plate. So instead of bone kinking, it kind of gets displaced, like shearing one end of the tibia over the other. And the other possibility is that it was squeezed. That's how we think these things are fractured.
Would something like a light squeeze cause a fracture like that?
No, cause a fracture like that, pathologist, I think requires significant amount of pressure.
Thank you. Nothing further.
All right. Cross-examination.
Doctor, so I want to ask you about the potential of blunt force impact. I think your testimony was that, this could be shaking, this could be a blunt force impact that couldn't be excluded. Could you describe what is a blunt force impact?
Blunt force impact is when a body part strikes an object such that it can leave behind a bruise or not, but there is no actual breaking. So for example, if I strike you with my fist, that would be an example.
Okay. And that cannot be excluded in this case.
Correct.
You spoke about, in the blunt force impact, that would be an acute occurrence, right?
Right.
You talked about how injuries are the result of like an energy transfer. I'm sorry if I didn't use the right words that you said.
That's correct.
How much force are we talking about that would be required to produce such an injury?
I can't tell you in numbers what actual force is needed. There is literature from the motor vehicle industry that have looked at how much energy can be generated in a motor vehicle accident. You can find dummies, for example. But in this case, suffice it to say that this is a significant injury that required a significant amount of force, just because of the extent of the injury.
And I think you had talked about how the injury is so diffuse. Could that be related to the blunt force impact on a soft surface, making it so diffuse?
Yes.
Okay. You had said that it would be a significant amount of force to result in the injury in regards to a blunt force impact, but you're not able to describe, like in numbers, what that would look like. Are there any studies or anything out there that you could point to help me read on this that would describe that, or do we not have that?
As I said, the motor vehicle accident literature does have references mainly regarding crash testing and the like.
Okay.
But this is not something that you can actually do because you can't.
Right. So it's fair to say there, and if I'm hearing you right, there's not studies on this because it's impossible to actually study it.
Correct.
There's estimates, but we don't know for sure. Let me ask you the same thing about potential shaking. I mean, do we know what type of force would be required in a shake to cause an injury?
No. No, there are papers that talk about not just the energy, but how fast the head needs to vibrate and so on. But it's obviously an experiment that you really can't do. What we know about shaking is because there have been published articles by pediatricians such as Suzanne Starling that look at cases of subdural hemorrhage with swelling of the brain that were taken from individuals that confessed actually doing this. And their value lies in that many of these stories were actually, many of these descriptions of shaking were actually obtained before there was a diagnosis of shaking.
So okay, if I could sum up then, it's fair to say that we can't say that such a shake would cause such an injury, right?
That's right.
And there's no way to really get a firm answer on that.
Right.
But you can say with medical confidence that it could be, either a shake or either a blunt force impact.
Right.
Thank you. Those are all the questions that I have.
Can you redirect?
Just briefly. Doctor, I want to ask you about the fracture again to the right tibia. Was that fracture a fracture that had healed as if some time had passed, or was that a recent fracture?
Recent.
And as far as you were aware, and at the time you performed this, or as you're sitting here now, Darrel Jr. was never in a car accident.
Right.
Thank you. Nothing further.
All right.
No other questions on that, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you, doctor. All right. How many more witnesses do you have?
Your Honor, I actually have no further witnesses, and I was going to ask, I've had Deputy Singer waiting, and I'm not intending on calling him, so if he may be excused, I'll make sure he gets home.
right,
Well, I'm gonna call Detective Yeager then, if Ms. Tanha's not going to.
all right. So why don't I do this? While we prepare for that, you can then release your witness. I'm gonna take a recess. We'll come back and we'll continue. Court is standing in recess.
Teenage District Court for County of Washington, State of Michigan is now back in session. We have with Judge Simpson.
You may be seated. Back on the record in the case of the people of the state of Michigan versus Darrell Hicks.
Good
And
afternoon, Your Honor. Marie Tanhas, Assistant Prosecuting Attorney on behalf of the people.
Sam Bernstein with non.
all right, and the people have no more witnesses and have rested. Mr. Bernstein,
I'm going to be calling Detective Brian Yeager to the stand, Your Honor.
all right, very good. Sir, please come forward and be sworn.
Testimony about the food, whole international food building. States book, first, last name, right?
My name is Brian Yeager, Brianyeager.
All right, you may inquire.
Good afternoon, Detective. I know it may be somewhat odd for defense counsel to call the OIC when you are otherwise not called, but here we are. So this was a case that you were the investigator on, right?
Yes.
And you had several occasions to speak with Mr. Hicks.
Yes.
And on one of those occasions, that was at the Washtenaw County Sheriff's Department.
Yes.
He had come in, I mean, this is a prelim, so he had come in to do a polygraph test, right?
Yes.
And there was like a pre-interview session with Detective Babbage before that.
Yes.
And you were like observing that session.
Yes.
And you heard the conversation that was made during the conversation.
Yes.
And you ultimately wrote down that conversation in your police report, right? So, Mr. Hicks says some things that could be considered admissions against his own interest, right?
I'm gonna object as to counsel characterizing what the statement may have been interpreted as. I think there's a more direct question. Yes.
Any response to that?
I mean, that's fine. I can rephrase it, Your Honor, if that,
Thank
I thought I was skipping a
Take the
step.
objection, rephrase.
What did Mr. Hicks say regarding,
I'm gonna object, Your Honor, hearsay.
Yes. Response?
let's try again, Judge.
For what?
Did Mr. Hicks make any admissions that day?
Yes.
What did he say?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Judge, why can't I ask what,
Because it's hearsay.
whether statements against his own interests?
It's classic hearsay. That's one of the reasons why it's hearsay, because you can't get the testimony of the defendant in by that means. He would have to waive his right, because what protects him is his right to not testify. So you can't get his testimony in by taking it through some other means. It's hearsay. That's why the rule's there in Great Park.
But it's,
So the objection is sustained. You can argue with me all night long if you want, but I'm telling you, it's still gonna be sustained.
I just only wanted to argue for 2 more minutes, Judge. But generally speaking, when police officers get up there, they talk about what the defendant said,
Because they're not the ones.
because the prosecutor's calling them.
Your Honor, if
Yes.
I may clarify, victim is not considered a party.
Yes.
Counsel is, as I would presume, on the side of the defendant as he's representing him, not a party opponent.
Correct. That's one analysis. See, the other was the one I gave.
Well,
But-
I guess I can't get what I want to get in, and Ms. Tanner made a good move by not calling Detective Yeager, so I think we're all done.
Appreciate the compliment, Your Honor. Nothing further.
From this witness. All right, thank you. You may step down. Thank you. I think that's the shortest time you've ever been on the stand before. All right. Any additional witnesses for the defense?
There you are.
Do I have
At
a
this point, we would move for bind over on all the counts in.
response?
I do have a response, Your Honor, and I, of course, didn't get as much in as I was hoping to, which somewhat undercuts me, but it is what it is. Look, I mean, the first degree child abuse cases, People v. Maynor is the law. And that is, it's not just that a person might have an intent to commit an act. The person must intend to commit the injury that followed that act. And that's from People v. Maynor 470, Mich. 289. And, Dr. Schmidt just testified, he said to cause an injury would be significant force, but we don't exactly know what amount of force a shake leads to an injury. We don't exactly know how much force a blunt force impact would have to cause an injury. The distinction here when we're talking about first degree child abuse is that the person needs to intend for the injury that follows from an act. And that's what's not on the table for Your Honor to consider. There's no admissions for Mr. Hicks. There's no witnesses to an act. And we don't have anything that shows that, even at a probable cause stage, there's just nothing on the table that shows he had an intent to create some sort of injury from an act.
Going to be an issue for the jury.
Well, I think it's also
making the argument that I'm to try to figure out his intent. I couldn't make that determination anyway at this stage. That's for the fact finder. That's clearly a question.
Of course, the jury instructions say knowingly or intentionally caused the injury. And so there has to be, in the Maynor case, says more than intent to commit an act, the person must intend to commit the injury that followed the act. And that's what's not present here. And that's what I'm arguing is needed for a bind over, Your Honor, that there needs to be that intent to commit the injury. That's what knowingly and intentionally committing an act leading to serious physical harm means. And that part is in the jury instructions in the statute, Your Honor. And so that's what's not present here. And my argument is that without that, there's no first degree child abuse that has been shown. There's not been shown proofs that there was intent to commit that act. They're not knowingly or intentionally would be the language.
But Mr. Springton, if by something occurring to this child, which it did, and not immediately contacting his primary caregiver, that being his mother, that could be an indicia of some intent on his part, but not something I can decide here. I mean, that's what I'm getting at. I mean, you can, you argue, but that's clearly a question of fact. And
I hear what you're saying, Your Honor. I think there was some evidence that there was a meeting with a medical person at the home where this was discussed. And Dr. Parkin Joseph said that medical neglect played a role in some of the injuries that were here. And I mean, a medical person saw the baby. He was not instructed to do something otherwise. So I think there is something there, Your Honor, that shows that, he brought this up to someone and laid it out there and was not told otherwise. So it's not, did he call mom? I mean, he told an at-home social worker.
okay, but it's still not something I can resolve.
Well, I understand the constraints that Your Honor is faced with the factual presentation here. I don't think there's enough elements there for first degree child abuse. And the charges that flow from it, I don't think can go either, Your Honor. So that's the basis of my argument.
Any response? I don't necessarily need it, but go ahead.
No, not by way of argument. I do want to make a clarification because we are going to have a transcript. So I want to be very clear.
Yes.
There was no testimony from Dr. Parkin Joseph that this was medical neglect. I want to be very clear about that.
But I think there was like a contribution of medical neglect. I mean, she said it was in her consultation notes, Your Honor.
Your Honor, it was considered, and we are all very happy that she considered all possibilities and then jumped straight to abusive head trauma. So yes, it was considered. That is not the cause of these injuries. She could not have been more. clear. Thank you.
I would ask the court to please consider my arguments. I think I'm on point. I think it's in this, I think Maynard supports my argument, Your Honor. Thank you.
Well, then I'll start with count two, since that is the predicate offense really for count one. The court believes that there is sufficient evidence to, he's the only one in the care of this child, the only one that, at least by the testimony that the court has before it, has access to this child. It is clear from the medical testimony that during that period in time, between the time that the defendant has care of that child and then mom returns to get that child, something acute, something traumatic happened to this child. On that, quite frankly, the court believes that it may be up to a jury to decide what the defendant may have known at the time, what he may have done knowingly or didn't do knowingly. But those are all questions to be decided by a jury. I can't make that determination here. Further, to the extent it needs more analysis, the issue of one's intent can be shown by what they did, how they did it, what they didn't do, what they said, what they didn't say. Any other facts and circumstances can be used to show someone's intent. A jury could come back and determine by his lack of saying anything, his lack of contact, and I'm not saying that they should or shouldn't, but a jury could come back and make that determination that he intentionally did this because something had happened to that child. Again, that's up for the fact finder. But for the purposes of probable cause, given that that could be what a reasonable fact finder could conclude based upon what I have before me, I think the people have indeed sustained their burden of showing the necessary to show the offense of child abuse in the first degree. And so therefore, the people having shown that to sufficiency for this court, I would bind the defendant over on count two, since it is a predicate offense and there was indeed a death involved. Then the court would also bind the defendant over to stand trial on count one. And the court also does believe that there is sufficient evidence shown by the testimony in this case that the defendant properly would be bound over and should stand trial as to count two, murder in the second degree. Therefore, the people having sustained the burden, the defendant is bound over to stand trial on all three counts.
May I approach the send information?
In my calendar, Your Honor, I have a copy of information, waive any further reading. Stand mute.
Defendant having waived formal reading, standing mute to all three counts. Court will enter a not guilty plea. Pre-trial will be set for
June 30th at 1:30 p.m.
June 30th, 2025, 1:30 before Judge Cohn.
June
Do I
30th,
believe
Your
it's
Honor.
a Judge Conlon case?
I do have Conlon here. Where you- Well, I have the file marked up.
I was just going through the splits, but if your file says Conlon, I can give you one.
Thank you.
Looked like Conky in my little spreadsheet thing.
It looks like it on your, no, I have this as Conlon.
Okay, Judge Conlon is July 2nd at 1:30.
July 2nd, 2025, 1:30 before Judge Conlon.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Bond will continue as said. Thank you. Do you think she did? Meet her?